The dusty trail stretched endlessly before Lancaster as he rode into Bisbee, Arizona on that scorching June day in 1882. Completely unaware that the woman serving whiskey at the saloon would become his wife within a fortnight and turn his entire world upside down. He had traveled from Wyoming with nothing but his horse, his rifle, and enough silver dollars to start fresh after losing his family's ranch to a wildfire that had swept through the territory 2 months prior. The desert heat was different from what he knew back north, more intense and unforgiving, but Pierce had always been the type to adapt rather than complain. Bisbee was a copper mining town, relatively new and growing fast, filled with prospectors hoping to strike it rich and cowboys looking for work on the surrounding ranches. The main street was lined with wooden buildings that still smelled of fresh pine, and the constant sound of hammers and saws filled the air as more structures went up each week. Pierce guided his chestnut mare toward the hitching post outside the Lucky Strike saloon, his throat parched and his shoulders aching from days in the saddle. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the smell of spilled liquor. A piano player pecked out a lively tune in the corner, and men crowded around card tables, their voices rising and falling with their fortunes. Pierce approached the bar, and that was when he saw her for the first time. She was tall for a woman, maybe 5'8", with auburn hair pinned up in a way that showed off her long neck. Her eyes were the color of new grass, startling and bright even in the dim saloon light. She wore a simple dark green dress that had seen better days but was clean and well-maintained. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight accent he could not quite place. "Maybe East Coast, maybe somewhere else entirely." "Whiskey," Pierce said, pulling off his hat and setting it on the bar. "And some water if you have it. We have both." She poured the whiskey first, then filled a glass with water from a pitcher. Her hands were steady and graceful, and Pierce noticed a small scar on her right wrist, white against her tanned skin. "Thank you, miss." "Faye," she said quickly. "Just Faye." "Pierce Lancaster," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated for just a moment before shaking it. Her grip was firm, confident, not the delicate touch he might have expected. "New in town?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Just arrived. Looking for work, actually." "Know of any ranches hiring?" Faye wiped down the bar with a cloth, her eyes scanning the room habitually as if checking for trouble. "The Diamond Creek Ranch about 10 miles north is always looking for good hands. The owner is a fair man named Samuel Henderson. Tell him Faye from the Lucky Strike sent you and he will at least hear you out." Pierce nodded, grateful for the information. He drank his whiskey slowly, savoring the burn, then downed the water in 3 long gulps. "You have been in Bisbee long?" "Long enough," Faye said, and something in her tone suggested the conversation was over. She moved down the bar to serve another customer, leaving Pierce to wonder about the mystery in those green eyes. Over the next 2 weeks, Pierce found himself returning to the Lucky Strike every evening after long days working at the Diamond Creek Ranch. Samuel Henderson had hired him on the spot, impressed by his experience with cattle and horses. The work was hard but honest, and Pierce threw himself into it with the determination of a man rebuilding his life from ashes. But no matter how exhausted he was, he always found the energy to ride back into town and sit at Faye's bar. Their conversations grew longer and more personal with each passing day. He learned that she had come to Bisbee 8 months ago from somewhere back east, though she was vague about the details. She learned that he had lost everything in Wyoming and was starting over. There was a connection between them that neither could deny, a pull that felt both natural and inevitable. On the 15th day after their first meeting, Pierce waited until the saloon was nearly empty, before approaching Faye with something he had been turning over in his mind for days. "Faye, I know we have not known each other long, but I feel like I have known you my whole life," he began, his hands nervous on the brim of his hat. "I am a simple man. I work hard, I keep my word, and I do not have much to offer except a future I am trying to build. But if you would consider it, I would be honored if you would marry me." Faye's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked almost frightened. Then something softened in her expression, a vulnerability Pierce had not seen before. "You do not know anything about me." "I know enough," Pierce said firmly. "I know you are kind to every drunk who stumbles in here. I know you work twice as hard as anyone else. I know you have a good heart and you are running from something that puts shadows in your eyes. I do not care about your past, Faye. I care about our future." She was quiet for so long that Pierce thought she might refuse. Then she reached across the bar and took his hand. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 days later by the town preacher in a small ceremony with only 2 witnesses pulled from the street. Faye wore a simple white dress that the seamstress had altered overnight, and Pierce wore his only good suit, brushed clean of trail dust. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Pierce kissed her gently, feeling like the luckiest man alive. They moved into a small house on the outskirts of town that Pierce had been renting. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a porch that needed repair, but Faye made it feel like a home within days. She hung curtains in the windows and planted herbs in the small garden plot. They fell into an easy rhythm of domestic life, and Pierce found himself happier than he had been in years. At night, they would lie together in the darkness, and Faye would trace the scars on Pierce's hands from years of ranch work. "Tell me about Wyoming," she would say, and he would paint pictures with words of snow-capped mountains and valleys filled with wildflowers. Sometimes he would ask about her life before Bisbee, but she would grow quiet and change the subject, and Pierce would let it drop because he had meant what he said about not caring about her past. 2 months into their marriage, everything changed. Pierce was in town picking up supplies at the general store when he noticed a commotion outside the sheriff's office. A crowd had gathered around the notice board, and men were talking in low, excited voices. Pierce handed his list to the shopkeeper and wandered over to see what the fuss was about. A new wanted poster had been tacked to the board, and Pierce felt his blood run cold when he saw the face staring back at him. It was a drawing, crude but unmistakable. Faye's green eyes, her high cheekbones, the way her hair fell in waves. The name beneath the picture read, Fiona Rose Blackthorne. Wanted for bank robbery and murder. $5,000 reward. Pierce stared at the poster, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. There had to be some mistake. His Faye, the woman who sang while she washed dishes and left water out for stray dogs, could not be a bank robber and murderer. But the resemblance was too strong to dismiss, and suddenly all the pieces clicked into place. The way she had been vague about her past, the scar on her wrist, the shadows in her eyes, the fact that she had given him only a first name. $5,000, a man next to Pierce said, whistling low. That is enough to set a man up for life. Says here she robbed the First National Bank in Santa Fe last year, another man added. Killed a guard in the process. Cold-blooded killer, that one. Pierce's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to defend her, to tell these men they were wrong, but he could not speak. He turned away from the crowd and walked back to the general store in a daze, mechanically collecting his supplies and loading them into the wagon. His mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had she married him to hide? Had she ever really cared for him at all? Or was everything between them built on lies? The ride back to their house felt like it took hours instead of minutes. Pierce found Faye in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread, her sleeves rolled up and flour dusting her arms. She looked up when he entered and smiled, but the smile faded when she saw his expression. "Pierce, what is wrong?" He dropped the supplies on the table and pulled the folded wanted poster from his pocket. He had torn it from the board when no one was looking, unable to leave her face exposed for the whole town to gawk at. He unfolded it and placed it on the table between them. Faye went perfectly still. All the color drained from her face, and she gripped the edge of the counter as if her legs might give out. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Tell me it is not true," Pierce said, his voice rough with emotion. "Tell me this is some kind of mistake." Faye looked down at the poster, then up at him, and he saw tears forming in her eyes. "I cannot tell you that," she whispered, "but I can tell you the truth if you will listen." Pierce pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted. "I am listening." Faye sank into the chair across from him, her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. "My real name is Fiona Rose Remington, not Blackthorne. That part of the poster is wrong. I was born in Boston in 1859, which makes me 23 years old. My father was a banker, my mother died when I was young, and I was raised to be a proper lady who would make a good match and bear children and never have an original thought." She paused, gathering her courage. "When I was 20, my father arranged for me to marry a man named Charles Blackthorne, a business associate of his. Charles was 45 years old, cruel, and had buried 2 wives already under suspicious circumstances. I refused, and my father told me I had no choice. So I ran." Pierce listened without interrupting, watching the play of emotions across her face. "I made it as far as Santa Fe before my money ran out," Faye continued. "I was desperate, sleeping in alleys, stealing food to survive. That is when I met a man named Jack Turner. He was charming and kind, or so I thought. He offered me a place to stay, meals, safety. I was naive enough to trust him." Her voice broke slightly. "Jack was a criminal. He robbed banks, stagecoaches, trains. By the time I realized what he was, I was already in too deep. He threatened to turn me into my father if I tried to leave, and I believed him." "The bank robbery," Pierce said quietly. "I was there," Faye admitted, tears now streaming down her face. "But I did not rob it, and I certainly did not kill anyone. Jack and his gang did the robbery. I was just supposed to stand outside and watch for lawmen. But something went wrong. There was shooting, and when I ran inside to see what happened, a guard was dead on the floor. Jack grabbed me and we ran, but witnesses saw me. They assumed I was part of it, that I had pulled the trigger." She looked up at Pierce with desperate eyes. "I swear on everything I hold sacred, I did not kill that man. I have never killed anyone. What happened to Jack? He was shot by a bounty hunter in Texas 3 months ago. I read about it in a newspaper. By then, I had already escaped from him and made my way here, trying to disappear and start a new life." She reached across the table toward him, but stopped short of touching his hand, as if afraid he would pull away. "I should have told you before we married. I know that. But I was so tired of running and so afraid of being alone. And then I met you, and you were so good and decent, and I thought maybe I could finally have something real and true. I am sorry, Pierce. I am so sorry." Pierce sat in silence, processing everything she had told him. Part of him wanted to be angry, to feel betrayed by her deception. But looking at her tear-stained face, all he could feel was a fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. He thought about the past 2 months, every moment they had shared, every laugh and touch and whispered conversation. That had been real. He knew it in his bones. "You love me?" he asked. Faye's breath caught. "More than I thought it was possible to love another person." "Then that is all that matters," Pierce said firmly. He reached across the table and took both of her hands in his. I meant what I said in my vows, Faye, for better or worse. I do not care what some poster says. I know you, and I know you are not a murderer. But the reward, Faye said desperately. $5,000. Someone in town will recognize me eventually. They will turn me in. Then we will leave, Pierce said, but even as he said it, he knew running was not a solution. They could run for the rest of their lives and always be looking over their shoulders. No, actually, we are going to fix this. How? We are going to Santa Fe. We are going to find proof that you did not kill that guard. There must be something, someone who saw what really happened. And we are going to clear your name. Faye shook her head. That is too dangerous. If we go back there, they will arrest me on sight. Not if we are smart about it, Pierce said. I have some money saved, enough to hire a good lawyer, maybe a private investigator. We will do this the right way, through the law, not by running. And if we fail, Pierce squeezed her hands tighter, then they will have to take us both. Faye's eyes widened. Pierce, no, you cannot say things like that. This is my burden to bear, not yours. We are married, Pierce said simply. Your burdens are my burdens. Your fights are my fights. I am not letting you face this alone, Faye. Not now, not ever. She stood abruptly and came around the table, throwing her arms around him. Pierce held her close, feeling her body shake with sobs. I do not deserve you, she whispered against his shoulder. Yes, you do, he said firmly. You deserve happiness and safety and a life without fear, and I am going to make sure you get it. They spent the rest of the day making plans. Pierce would tell Samuel Henderson that he needed to take a leave of absence for family matters. They would travel to Santa Fe as quietly as possible, avoiding main roads where bounty hunters might be looking. Once there, they would need to find someone who had been at the bank during the robbery, someone who could testify to what they saw. That night, as they lay in bed, Faye told Pierce everything she could remember about the day of the robbery. It had been late afternoon, and the bank was crowded with customers. Jack and two other men had burst in with guns drawn. They ordered everyone to the floor while they forced the bank manager to open the safe. Faye had been outside, terrified and wanting to run, but too afraid of what Jack would do if she disobeyed. I heard the gunshot, she said quietly. It was so loud. I ran inside without thinking. The guard was on the ground and there was so much blood. Jack grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and dragged me out. We rode for hours before stopping. He told me if I breathed a word to anyone about what really happened, he would kill me and make it look like an accident. I believed him. He had eyes like a snake, Pierce, cold and empty. He cannot hurt you anymore, Pierce said, stroking her hair. And I promise you, we are going to prove your innocence. They left Bisbee 3 days later before dawn with their belongings packed onto 2 horses. Pierce had told Samuel the truth about needing to take care of urgent business, and the ranch owner had been understanding, even offering to keep Pierce's job open for when he returned. They rode northeast toward New Mexico, taking back trails and avoiding towns as much as possible. The journey took nearly 2 weeks. They traveled during the cooler morning and evening hours, resting during the hottest part of the day under whatever shade they could find. Pierce taught Faye how to shoot his spare revolver, thinking that if trouble found them, she should be able to defend herself. She proved to be a quick learner, her hands steady and her aim true after just a few days of practice. During those long days on the trail, they talked about everything and nothing. Faye told him about growing up in Boston, about the books she had loved to read and the music she had played on the piano. Pierce described his childhood in Wyoming, learning to ride before he could properly walk, helping his father drive cattle across vast grasslands. They were learning each other in a deeper way, building a foundation of trust that went beyond the physical attraction and easy companionship of their first months together. One night, camped under a sky so full of stars it looked like diamonds scattered on black velvet, Faye said, "No matter what happens in Santa Fe, I want you to know that these past months with you have been the happiest of my life." "They are not past tense," Pierce said, pulling her closer. "We have many more happy years ahead of us. You are an optimist." "I am a realist who happens to love a remarkable woman," he corrected. "And I do not intend to let anyone take you away from me." They reached Santa Fe on a hot afternoon in late September. The city was much larger than Bisbee, with adobe buildings that glowed golden in the sunlight and narrow streets that wound through the old Spanish town. Pierce found them a room in a small boarding house on the outskirts, run by a widow who asked no questions as long as they paid in advance. Their first priority was finding a lawyer. Pierce asked around discreetly and was directed to a man named Thomas Whitaker, who had a reputation for taking on difficult cases. Whitaker's office was above a mercantile, reached by a narrow staircase that creaked with each step. The lawyer himself was in his 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Pierce explained the situation as carefully as he could, showing Whitaker the wanted poster and telling him Faye's version of events. The lawyer listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a piece of paper. "This will not be easy," Whitaker said when Pierce finished. "The law sees your wife as an accomplice to murder. Even if she did not pull the trigger, the fact that she was with the robbers makes her legally culpable." "But she was coerced," Pierce argued. "She was forced to be there against her will." "That is a defense we can use, certainly, but we will need evidence to support it. Witnesses, documents, anything that proves her story." Whitaker tapped his pen on the desk thoughtfully. "The guard who was killed, his name was Robert Morrison. He was 62 years old, a grandfather, well-liked in the community. His death caused quite an uproar. The territorial marshal personally led the manhunt for the robbers. Were any of the other gang members caught?" Faye asked quietly. "Two were killed in a shootout with lawmen about a month after the robbery. Jack Turner, as you mentioned, was killed in Texas. That leaves you as the only surviving member of the gang, which makes you a very tempting target for the law. They want someone to pay for Morrison's death. Even if that someone is innocent," Whitaker gave her a sympathetic look. "Especially then. It is easier than admitting they let the real killer slip through their fingers. But that is why you hired me. I am very good at making the law uncomfortable." They agreed on a fee that would take most of Pierce's savings, but was worth it if it meant clearing Faye's name. Whitaker told them he would start by reviewing the court records and newspaper accounts from the time of the robbery, then try to track down witnesses who had been in the bank that day. "In the meantime, you two need to stay out of sight," Whitaker warned. "If the marshal gets wind that you are in town, he will arrest Mrs. Lancaster first and ask questions later. Give me 2 weeks to build a case before we make any moves." Those 2 weeks were the longest of Pierce's life. They stayed mostly in their room, venturing out only when necessary and always with Faye wearing a bonnet that shadowed her face. Pierce bought newspapers and they read them together, looking for any mention of the robbery or new developments in the case. There was nothing. Whitaker visited them periodically with updates. He had found the names of several customers who had been in the bank during the robbery. He was trying to locate them for interviews. He had also obtained the coroner's report on Robert Morrison, which stated that the guard had been shot at close range with a large-caliber revolver. Faye had never even held a gun until Pierce taught her on the trail, a fact they hoped would work in her favor. On the 10th day of their wait, there was a knock on their door late at night. Pierce answered it cautiously, his hand on his revolver, and found Whitaker standing in the hallway looking grim. "We have a problem," the lawyer said, stepping inside. "One of the witnesses I tracked down, a woman named Margaret Sullivan who was in the bank that day, she remembered you." He nodded at Faye. "She remembers seeing you outside the bank before the robbery, looking nervous. She thinks you were a lookout." "I was," Faye admitted. "But I did not want to be. I was terrified." "Can you prove that?" Whitaker asked pointedly. Faye hesitated. "I do not know how. Jack never told anyone about forcing me to help him. He kept me isolated from the other gang members most of the time." "Then we need to change tactics," Whitaker said, beginning to pace the small room. "If we cannot prove coercion, we need to prove you did not fire the fatal shot. The problem is, in the chaos of the robbery, no one got a clear look at who shot Morrison. The witnesses all say the same thing. There was shouting, shots fired, and then the guard was dead." "What about the gun?" Pierce asked. "You said Morrison was shot with a large caliber revolver. What kind of guns did the gang members carry?" Whitaker pulled out his notes. "According to the witness statements, at least 2 of the robbers carried .45 caliber Colts. That is fairly standard for that kind of work. And Jack Turner, when he was killed in Texas, was there an inventory of his possessions?" The lawyer's eyes lit up. "That is an excellent question. Let me wire the sheriff in Texas and find out. If Turner was carrying the murder weapon when he died, and if we can prove it through ballistics or witness testimony, that might be enough to establish reasonable doubt about your wife's involvement in the shooting." Hope flickered in Pierce's chest for the first time in days. "How long will that take?" "A few days for the wire to reach Texas and get a response. Maybe a week total." Whitaker headed for the door, then paused. "I should tell you, the marshal is getting suspicious. Someone reported seeing a woman matching the wanted poster's description at the general store last week. He has been asking questions around town. You need to be extremely careful." After Whitaker left, Pierce and Faye sat together on the narrow bed, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. "Maybe we should just run," Faye said quietly. "Go to Mexico or California, somewhere they will not find us, and spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders." Pierce shook his head. "No, we are seeing this through. We are so close, Faye. I can feel it." "I am scared," she admitted. "So am I," Pierce said honestly. "But I am more scared of losing you. Whatever comes, we face it together." 5 days later, Whitaker burst into their room with news. "I heard back from Texas. When Jack Turner was killed, the sheriff confiscated his belongings, including 2 revolvers. One of them is a .45 caliber Colt that matches the description of the gun used in several other robberies Turner committed. I have convinced the Texas sheriff to send the gun here for comparison with the bullet that killed Morrison." "Can they do that?" Faye asked. "Compare bullets to guns. It is not an exact science yet, but there are experts who can examine the rifling patterns and make educated determinations. If we can show that Turner's gun is consistent with the bullet that killed Morrison, and that you never possessed such a weapon, it strengthens our case considerably." "How long until the gun arrives?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. The sheriff is sending it by secure courier." Whitaker sat down in the room's only chair. "In the meantime, I have been working another angle. I found the bank manager who was on duty during the robbery. His name is Henry Foster, and he is willing to testify. He remembers seeing a young woman outside the bank before the robbery, looking distressed. He says when the shooting started, you ran inside, not out, which struck him as odd behavior for an accomplice. He thinks you were trying to help." "I was trying to see what happened," Faye said. "I heard the gunshot and I panicked." "That helps us," Whitaker said. "It shows you were not acting like a hardened criminal. Combined with the gun evidence, we might have enough to at least get the charges reduced from murder to accessory, which carries a much lighter sentence." And if we can prove coercion, you might walk away with time served or even full acquittal." Pierce felt the tight band around his chest loosen slightly. "So what is our next step?" We go to the marshal and we tell him Mrs. Lancaster is willing to surrender voluntarily in exchange for a fair hearing. We do this on our terms, with me present as counsel, and we make it clear that we have evidence that will exonerate her. It is risky, but it is better than waiting for him to find you and arrest you on the street. Faye went pale. "Surrender. Pierce, I will be locked in a jail cell." "Only temporarily," Whitaker assured her, "and I will fight to keep bail reasonable so your husband can post it. But Mrs. Lancaster, you have to understand you are a fugitive. Eventually the marshal will find you. This way we control the narrative. We show that you have nothing to hide." Pierce took Faye's hand. "He is right, and I will be there every step of the way, I promise." It took another 2 days to arrange the meeting with Marshal William Dawson. Whitaker insisted they do it properly, with advance notice and a clear understanding that Faye was surrendering voluntarily. The marshal agreed to meet them at his office at 10 in the morning. Pierce spent the night before holding Faye, neither of them sleeping much. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "Nothing is going to change that." "I love you too," she whispered back. "More than words can say." The next morning they dressed carefully. Faye wore her best dress and Pierce put on his suit. Whitaker met them outside the marshal's office, his leather satchel full of documents and evidence. "Remember," he told Faye, "say as little as possible. Let me do the talking." Marshal Dawson was a tall man with a thick mustache and eyes that had seen too much violence. He looked at Faye with obvious suspicion when they entered his office. "So you are Fiona Blackthorne," he said. "Fiona Remington Lancaster," Whitaker corrected. "She married Mr. Lancaster here in Bisbee 2 months ago. And she is here voluntarily to clear her name in the matter of the First National Bank robbery." "Clear her name?" Dawson's eyebrows rose. "She is wanted for murder." "A murder she did not commit," Whitaker said calmly. He began laying out their evidence, explaining about Jack Turner's gun, the witness testimony from Henry Foster, and the timeline of events that proved Faye had been coerced into participating. Dawson listened, his expression giving nothing away. When Whitaker finished, the marshal leaned back in his chair. "That is all well and good, counselor, but the fact remains that this woman was present during a robbery that resulted in a man's death. At minimum, she is an accessory." "An accessory under duress," Whitaker countered. "Which is a valid legal defense. That is for a judge to decide, not me." Dawson stood and pulled a pair of handcuffs from his desk drawer. "Fiona Remington Lancaster, I am placing you under arrest for your involvement in the robbery of the First National Bank and the death of Robert Morrison." "No," Pierce said, stepping forward. "You do not need to cuff her. She came here willingly." "This is procedure, Mr. Lancaster," Dawson said, not unkindly. "Please step aside." Pierce's hands clenched into fists, every instinct screaming at him to protect his wife. But Faye touched his arm gently. "It is all right," she said quietly. "I knew this would happen." She held out her wrists and Dawson cuffed her, the metal clicking shut with a sound that made Pierce's stomach turn. "I will arrange a bail hearing for this afternoon," Whitaker said quickly. "Pierce, go back to the boarding house and gather what funds you have. We will need to post bail." Pierce wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the injustice of watching his innocent wife be led away in chains, but he forced himself to nod. "I will be back as soon as I can." As Dawson led Faye toward the cells in the back of the building, she looked over her shoulder at Pierce. "I trust you," she mouthed. Those 3 words gave him the strength to walk out of that office instead of doing something stupid that would only make things worse. He went back to the boarding house, collected their money, and then paced the floor for 3 hours until it was time to return for the bail hearing. The hearing was held in a small courtroom before Judge Harrison Mitchell, a stern-looking man in his 60s. Whitaker argued passionately for reasonable bail, emphasizing that Faye had surrendered voluntarily and had strong ties to the community through her marriage. The prosecutor, a young man named Daniel Wright, argued that Faye was a flight risk and should be held without bail. Judge Mitchell considered both arguments, then set bail at $1,000. Pierce's heart sank. He had $600 to his name, nowhere near enough. Whitaker must have seen his expression because he leaned over and whispered, "I can loan you the difference. You can pay me back when this is over." "I cannot ask you to do that," Pierce whispered back. "You are not asking, I am offering. Your wife does not deserve to sit in a cell while we build her defense." Pierce felt a surge of gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. "Thank you," he managed. It took another hour to arrange the bail payment, but finally, Faye was released into Pierce's custody with the understanding that she would return for trial in 3 weeks. The moment they were alone, Pierce pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly he was afraid he might hurt her. "I was terrified," Faye admitted against his chest. "That cell was so small and dark." "You do not have to go back there," Pierce promised. "We are going to win this." The next 2 weeks were a flurry of activity. Whitaker interviewed everyone he could find who had been at the bank during the robbery. He obtained statements from people who had known Jack Turner and could testify to his violent nature and habit of intimidating women. He worked with a firearms expert from Denver who examined the bullet that had killed Robert Morrison and compared it to test fires from Turner's confiscated revolver. Pierce supported Faye through all of it, holding her when she cried, encouraging her when she despaired, loving her with a fierceness that grew stronger every day. They spent their evenings taking walks on the outskirts of town, talking about their future, the children they hoped to have, the ranch they would build together once this nightmare was over. "I want at least 3 children," Faye said one evening as they watched the sun set over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. "Maybe 4. Boys or girls?" Pierce asked, his arm around her waist. "Both. A big rowdy family full of love and laughter." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we will ever get that, or am I fooling myself?" "We will get it," Pierce said with absolute certainty. "I believe in you, Faye. I believe in us. And I believe that the truth will come out." The trial began on a crisp October morning. The courtroom was packed with curious onlookers, newspapermen and residents who remembered the bank robbery and wanted to see justice served. Pierce sat in the front row directly behind Faye, close enough to touch her shoulder whenever she needed reassurance. The prosecution went first, calling witnesses who described the chaos of the robbery, the terror they had felt, the shock of seeing Robert Morrison's body on the floor. They called the marshal who had investigated the case, who testified about the evidence collected and the manhunt that followed. They painted Faye as a willing participant in a violent crime that had torn apart a family and shattered the community's sense of safety. Then, it was Whitaker's turn. He called Henry Foster, the bank manager, who described seeing Faye outside the bank looking nervous and frightened. "She did not look like a criminal," Foster said. "She looked like someone who was scared out of her mind, and when the shooting started, she ran toward the danger, not away from it. That is not the action of someone trying to rob a bank." He called Margaret Sullivan, the customer who had initially identified Faye. Under Whitaker's gentle questioning, she admitted that she had never actually seen Faye inside the bank during the robbery. "I saw her outside, pacing back and forth. She kept looking down the street like she was watching for something. But I did not see her with a gun, and I did not see her go inside until after the shooting." He called the firearms expert, who testified that the bullet that killed Morrison was consistent with having been fired from Jack Turner's Colt revolver, and inconsistent with the smaller caliber weapons the other gang members had carried. "In my professional opinion," the expert said, "Jack Turner fired the shot that killed Robert Morrison." Finally, Whitaker called Faye to the stand. Pierce watched her walk to the witness box, her back straight and her head high. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and she looked young and vulnerable and utterly incapable of murder. Whitaker took her through her story gently, letting her explain in her own words how she had met Jack Turner, how he had manipulated and threatened her, how terrified she had been during the robbery. Faye's voice shook at times, but she never wavered in her account. She looked directly at the jury as she spoke, letting them see her honesty and her pain. "Did you shoot Robert Morrison?" Whitaker asked. "No," Faye said firmly. "I have never shot anyone in my life. I did not even know how to use a gun until my husband taught me." "Did you want to be part of that robbery?" "No. I was terrified. Jack told me if I did not do exactly as he said, he would kill me or turn me over to my father, who would lock me away somewhere I could never escape. I believed him. He had hurt me before when I tried to refuse him." She touched her wrist, where the scar was visible even from Pierce's seat. "This is from when I tried to leave him. He held my wrist over a candle flame until I agreed to stay." The courtroom went silent. Pierce saw several jury members lean forward, their expressions shifting from skepticism to sympathy. The prosecutor tried to shake Faye's testimony during cross-examination, suggesting that she had willingly participated in the robbery and was now lying to save herself. But Faye remained calm and consistent, never contradicting herself, never getting flustered. Pierce had never been prouder of her. The trial lasted 3 days. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the jury retired to deliberate. Pierce and Faye waited in an empty witness room, holding hands and barely speaking. Whitaker came in periodically with updates, but there was nothing to report. The jury was taking their time, which could be good or bad. After 5 hours, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. They filed back into the courtroom, and Pierce tried to read their faces, but they were blank and inscrutable. Judge Mitchell asked the foreman to stand. "On the charge of murder in the 1st degree, how do you find?" "Not guilty, Your Honor." Pierce felt tears spring to his eyes. Beside him, Faye let out a sob of relief, but the foreman was not finished. "On the charge of accessory to robbery, how do you find?" "Guilty, but with a recommendation for leniency given the circumstances of coercion." Judge Mitchell nodded slowly. "Mrs. Lancaster, please rise." Faye stood, gripping the table to steady herself. Pierce stood too, moving as close as the bailiff would allow. "You have been found not guilty of murder, which means you are free of the most serious charge against you," the judge said. "However, you have been found guilty of being an accessory to robbery. Normally, this would carry a sentence of 5 to 10 years in prison. However, given the jury's recommendation, the evidence of coercion, and the fact that you voluntarily surrendered yourself to face justice, I am sentencing you to time served plus 2 years probation. You will be required to check in with Marshal Dawson monthly during your probation, and you are prohibited from leaving the territory of New Mexico during that time. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Faye whispered. "Thank you. You are free to go, Mrs. Lancaster. I hope you use this second chance wisely." As the judge's gavel came down, Pierce vaulted over the railing and swept Faye into his arms. She was crying, and so was he, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming gratitude. They had done it. She was free. Outside the courthouse, Whitaker shook Pierce's hand and accepted Faye's tearful thanks. "You two deserve to be happy," he said simply. "Now go build that life you have been dreaming about." They stayed in Santa Fe for one more week, making sure all the legal paperwork was in order and that Faye's name was officially cleared of the murder charge. The newspapers ran stories about the trial, most of them sympathetic to Faye and critical of Jack Turner's predatory behavior. Several people stopped them on the street to offer congratulations and support. Finally, they were free to leave. But instead of returning directly to Bisbee, they decided to take their time, to enjoy the journey as a celebration of their new beginning. They rode south through the golden aspens of autumn, camping under the stars and making love with the kind of passionate abandon that comes from nearly losing everything. One night, as they lay wrapped in blankets by the fire, Faye said, "I never thought I would be this happy. For so long I was just trying to survive day to day, but now, with you, I feel like I am actually living." "We both are," Pierce said, kissing her forehead. "And we have our whole lives ahead of us to keep living together." They reached Bisbee in mid-November, just as the desert nights were turning cold. Samuel Henderson welcomed Pierce back to the Diamond Creek Ranch with open arms, and when he heard what had happened in Santa Fe, he offered them the use of a small cabin on the ranch property rent-free until they could afford to buy their own land. The cabin was rustic but sturdy, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. Faye threw herself into making it a home, sewing curtains and rugs, planting a garden that would flourish in the spring. Pierce worked hard at the ranch, saving every penny he could toward their dream of owning their own place. As Faye's probation required, they made monthly trips to Santa Fe to check in with Marshal Dawson. The marshal was gruff but fair, and after the first few visits, he began to soften toward them. "You two are making an honest go of it," he said during their 6th visit. "I respect that." The 2 years of probation passed more quickly than Pierce would have thought possible. They were good years, full of hard work and simple pleasures. Faye found work as a seamstress in Bisbee, and her skill with a needle became well known. Pierce was promoted to foreman at the Diamond Creek Ranch, which came with a significant raise in pay. On the day Faye's probation officially ended, they celebrated with a small party at the cabin. Samuel and his wife came, along with some friends they had made in Bisbee. Whitaker even made the trip from Santa Fe, bearing a bottle of good whiskey and a legal document officially clearing Faye's name of all charges. "You are completely free," the lawyer told her. "No restrictions, no conditions, just a fresh start." That night, after their guests had left, Pierce and Faye sat on the porch watching the stars. "We should talk about the future," Pierce said. "Now that you can leave New Mexico, do you want to go somewhere else? Start over in a place where no one knows about your past?" Faye considered this. "I used to think I wanted that, but now I realize that running away does not solve anything. This is our home. These people know our story and they have accepted us anyway. That means something. So we stay. We build our ranch, we raise our children, and we live the life we have fought so hard for." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "Especially now." It took Pierce a moment to understand. Then his eyes went wide. "Faye, are you saying?" "I am pregnant," she confirmed, her smile radiant even in the darkness. "About 3 months along. I wanted to wait until the probation was over to tell you in case something went wrong, but everything is fine. The doctor confirmed it yesterday." Pierce let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "A real family." "We already are a real family," Faye said, cupping his face in her hands. "But yes, we are going to have a baby." "Are you ready to be a father?" I have never been more ready for anything in my life." Their son was born in early June of 1885, a healthy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Matthew Samuel Lancaster, after Pierce's father and the ranch owner who had given them so much support. Pierce held his son for the first time and felt something shift in his chest, a love so profound it made everything else seem small by comparison. Faye was a natural mother, patient and tender but firm when needed. Pierce marveled at how she could soothe Matthew's cries with just the sound of her voice, how she seemed to know instinctively what he needed. Watching her rock their son to sleep while humming a lullaby, Pierce felt like the luckiest man in the world. That summer, with their savings and a loan from Samuel Henderson, Pierce and Faye bought 160 acres of land about 15 miles from Bisbee. It was rough country, covered with mesquite and cactus, but it had a good water source and plenty of grazing land for cattle. They built their house themselves, with help from friends, a 4-room structure with a wide porch and windows facing the mountains. It took 3 years of backbreaking work to turn the land into a functioning ranch. Pierce bought a small herd of cattle and a few horses. Faye kept chickens and tended a vegetable garden that produced more than they could eat, so she sold the surplus in town. Slowly, the ranch began to turn a profit. During those years, their family grew. Faye gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Grace in 1887, a blonde-haired beauty with her father's brown eyes. Then came another son, William James, in 1889, who proved to be as stubborn and determined as both his parents combined. Their youngest, a daughter named Emily Rose, was born in 1892, completing their family of 6. The Lancaster Ranch became known throughout the territory for the quality of its cattle and the integrity of its owners. People respected Pierce's fair dealing and Faye's kindness. The story of how they had met and the trials they had overcome became something of a local legend, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Pierce took Faye to the spot where he had proposed in the Lucky Strike Saloon, which had been converted into a respectable restaurant. Over dinner, they reminisced about everything they had been through together. "You ever regret it?" Pierce asked. "Marrying me so quickly, all the trouble it brought." Faye reached across the table and took his hand. "Not for a single second. You saved my life, Pierce, not just from the law but from the fear and loneliness that was eating me alive. You gave me a reason to fight and you fought right alongside me. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." "You saved me too," Pierce said. "I was just drifting after the fire took everything. But then I found you, and suddenly I had a purpose again. A reason to build something that would last. And we did build it," Faye said, gesturing around them. "A life, a family, a future. All because a cowboy walked into a saloon one day and decided to take a chance on a woman with secrets." "Best chance I ever took," Pierce said, raising his glass. "To 10 years and 50 more after that. To us," Faye agreed, clinking her glass against his. "And to the life we have made." As the years passed, their children grew. Matthew proved to have his father's skill with horses and took over much of the training operation on the ranch. Sarah inherited her mother's creative talents and became an accomplished artist whose paintings of the Arizona landscape sold in galleries as far away as San Francisco. William followed in his father's footsteps, learning every aspect of ranching with dedication and enthusiasm. Emily, the youngest, had a gift for numbers and managed the ranch's finances with a skill that made even the bank manager nervous. In 1898, when Pierce was 41 and Faye was 39, they sat on their porch watching the sunset after a long day's work. Their children were scattered around the property, each engaged in their own pursuits, but all within sight of the house. It was a scene of domestic contentment that Pierce had once thought impossible. "Remember when I said they would have to take us both?" Pierce said suddenly. Faye looked at him, surprised. "That was 16 years ago. I have not thought about that in a long time." "I was thinking about it today, about how close we came to losing everything, about how we could have run, could have spent our whole lives hiding, but we did not. We stood our ground and we fought, and look what we have now." "Everything we dreamed of and more," Faye agreed. She rested her head on his shoulder, a gesture that had become second nature over the years. "You know what I think about sometimes? How different my life would have been if I had not walked into that saloon in Bisbee. If I had kept running, kept hiding." "You would have survived," Pierce said confidently. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever known." "Maybe, but I would not have lived, not really." "You taught me the difference, Pierce. You taught me that surviving is not the same as living, and that love is worth fighting for even when it seems impossible." Their eldest son, Matthew, called from the barn, something about a mare that was about to foal, and Pierce stood to go help. But he paused to kiss his wife, a long, tender kiss that held all the love and devotion of 16 years together. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every hard moment, every fear, every fight, all of it just to end up here with you." "Me too," Faye said softly. "Every single second." As Pierce walked toward the barn, he reflected on the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. He had come to Bisbee a broken man with nothing to lose, and he was leaving as a man with everything that mattered. A wife he loved more with each passing day, children who made him proud. A ranch that was the product of years of sweat and sacrifice. A life that had meaning and purpose. The years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the small joys and sorrows that make up any life. Pierce's hair turned gray at the temples, and Faye developed laugh lines around her eyes from smiling so much. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, weathered droughts and celebrated good years, and through it all they remained each other's constant support and truest love. In 1905, Matthew married a schoolteacher from Bisbee named Catherine, and they gave Pierce and Faye their first grandchild, a boy named Pierce Jr. Holding his grandson for the first time, Pierce felt the same overwhelming love he had felt when holding his own children, multiplied by the knowledge that his legacy would continue beyond him. Sarah married a banker and moved to Tucson but visited often, always bringing new paintings to hang in her parents' house. William married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, joining the two ranches and creating one of the largest cattle operations in southern Arizona. Emily, independent to the end, went to college in California and became a teacher, though she always came home for the summers. On a warm spring evening in 1910, Pierce and Faye celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary alone in the house, their children grown and gone to lives of their own. They danced in the kitchen to music only they could hear, swaying gently in the lamplight. "Have you been happy?" Pierce asked, a question he had asked many times over the years because her happiness mattered more to him than his own. "Deliriously, impossibly, wonderfully happy," Faye answered, the same answer she always gave because it was always true. "You are my greatest adventure, Pierce Lancaster." "The best decision I ever made." "Second best," Pierce corrected with a smile. "The best decision you made was walking into that saloon. I just had the good sense to notice you." They laughed together, the easy laughter of people who knew each other completely and loved each other anyway. Outside, the desert night was alive with sound, coyotes calling in the distance and owls hooting in the darkness. But inside, there was just the two of them, still as in love as they had been at the beginning, perhaps even more so because now their love was tempered by time and tested by trials. As they grew older, they slowed down but never stopped working. The ranch was their life's work, and they tended it with the same care they had given their children. They added a foreman to handle the day-to-day operations, but Pierce still rode out every morning to check on the cattle, and Faye still kept her garden, though now with help from grandchildren who came to visit. Their grandchildren loved to hear the story of how their grandparents met and fell in love, and Pierce and Faye told it often, embellishing the romantic parts and downplaying the dangerous ones. But the heart of the story never changed. A cowboy had unknowingly married a wanted woman, and when he found out, he had said they would have to take them both. It was a testament to the power of love to overcome any obstacle, any fear, any challenge. In the summer of 1920, Pierce and Faye celebrated their 38th anniversary surrounded by their children, their grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch house was full of noise and laughter and the chaos that comes with a large, loving family. Pierce looked around at the faces of his descendants and felt a profound sense of peace. This was what he and Faye had built together, not just a ranch but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Pierce and Faye sat on their porch one last time, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Pierce was 73 now, his back aching and his hands stiff with arthritis, but he still felt like that young cowboy who had ridden into Bisbee all those years ago whenever he looked at his wife. "You remember what you said to me on our wedding night?" Faye asked, her voice soft with memory. "You said you wanted to spend the rest of your life making me happy." "I remember," Pierce said. "Did I succeed?" "Beyond my wildest dreams," Faye said. She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in the way they had done thousands of times before. "And I hope you know that you made me happy too, every single day." "I do know," Pierce said. "How could I not when you showed me every day with your smile, your laughter, your love?" They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the house a baby cried and was quickly soothed. A dog barked in the distance. The wind rustled through the mesquite trees. It was an ordinary moment, and yet it was everything. "No regrets?" Pierce asked. "Not a single one," Faye answered. "You? Only that I did not find you sooner." Faye laughed, the sound as bright and beautiful as it had been when she was 23. "We found each other exactly when we were supposed to, not a moment too soon or too late." "I suppose you are right," Pierce agreed. "You usually are." "Usually," Faye teased. "Always." Pierce pulled her close, and they sat together as the night deepened around them. Two people who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, not because they were particularly strong or particularly brave, but because they had faced everything together. Their love had been tested by the law, by distance, by fear and uncertainty, and it had emerged stronger each time. In the years that followed, they continued to live on the ranch they had built, surrounded by the family they had raised. When Pierce passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81, Faye grieved but did not despair, because she knew that their love story did not end with death. It lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built from nothing, in the legend of the cowboy who had stood by his wanted wife and said they would have to take them both. Faye lived another 5 years after Pierce's passing, and she spent those years telling their story to anyone who would listen, making sure that the love they had shared would never be forgotten. She passed away on a spring morning in 1928, surrounded by her family, and her last words were, "I am coming, Pierce." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore only their names and the dates of their births and deaths. But those who knew their story understood that those simple markers represented something much greater. A love that had overcome impossible odds, a partnership that had built something lasting, and a testament to the power of standing together even when the whole world seems against you. The Lancaster Ranch continued to operate for generations after Pierce and Faye were gone, run by their descendants who carried on the legacy of hard work, integrity, and love that their grandparents had established. The story of the cowboy and the wanted woman became a family legend, passed down from parent to child, growing richer with each telling but never losing its essential truth. That real love is worth fighting for, that loyalty is the greatest virtue, and that together, two people can overcome anything. And so the story ended where all great love stories end, not with death but with legacy, not with sorrow but with celebration of a life well lived and a love well earned. Pierce Lancaster had ridden into Bisbee looking for a fresh start, and he had found so much more. He had found his soulmate, his partner, his greatest love. And when the world had tried to take her from him, he had stood firm and said they would have to take them both. It was a declaration of love that had defined their entire lives together, and it echoed through the generations that followed. A reminder that true love is not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone worth fighting for and never letting go. The desert wind still blows across the land where the Lancaster Ranch once stood, carrying with it whispers of the past and promises of the future. And if you listen closely on quiet nights, some say you can still hear the echo of laughter from the porch where Pierce and Faye sat together for so many years, watching the stars and counting their blessings. Their bodies may have returned to the dust, but their love story lives on, a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever believed that love can conquer all, that loyalty can overcome any obstacle, and that two people who stand together can face down the entire world and emerge victorious. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West itself, full of danger and adventure, heartbreak and triumph, but most of all, it was a story about the enduring power of love between two people who chose each other every single day, from that first meeting in a dusty saloon to their final moments together on Earth. And in the end, is that not what every great love story is really about? Not the dramatic gestures or the grand adventures, but the simple daily choice to love and be loved, to stand together no matter what comes, and to build something beautiful out of the raw materials of hope and determination and unwavering devotion. The sun sets over the Arizona desert the same way it did when Pierce first rode into Bisbee all those years ago, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. And somewhere in that eternal sunset, perhaps Pierce and Faye are together still, watching the beauty of the world they loved so much, their hands intertwined as they always were, their love as strong in death as it was in life. They had started as strangers, become lovers, survived as partners, and ended as legends. And their story, the story of the cowboy who unknowingly married a wanted woman and chose to stand by her when the truth came out, remains a testament to the fact that real love is not about finding someone who makes life easy, but about finding someone who makes the hard times worth enduring and the good times worth celebrating. That is the legacy of Pierce and Faye Lancaster, the cowboy and the wanted woman who became so much more than the circumstances that brought them together. They became a family, a dynasty, a legend. But most importantly, they became exactly what they had both needed most: home to each other, shelter in the storm, and proof that even in the hardest times and the wildest places, love can not only survive but thrive, growing stronger and deeper with each passing year until it becomes something eternal, something that transcends the boundaries of life and death, and lives on forever in the hearts and memories of those who come after. And so their story ends, not with a period but with an ellipsis, because the love between Pierce and Faye Lancaster never truly ended. It simply transformed, becoming part of the landscape of family history, part of the foundation upon which future generations built their own lives and loves. Every time a Lancaster descendant stood up for what was right, or chose love over fear, or decided to fight for something worth having, they were honoring the legacy of the cowboy and the wanted woman who proved that together, two people can overcome anything the world throws at them. The ranch may be gone now, sold off and subdivided into smaller properties, but the land remembers. The mountains remember. The desert wind remembers the laughter and the tears, the struggles and the triumphs, the ordinary days and the extraordinary love that made them special. And as long as there are people who believe in the power of love to transform lives and overcome obstacles, the story of Pierce and Faye Lancaster will continue to inspire, to encourage, and to remind us all that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple choice: to love someone completely, to stand by them unconditionally, and to face whatever comes together, hand in hand, heart to heart, now and forever.